2 years. For those viewing at home, the webcast, I would like to inform you that if you look above the video, you'll see a resources tab. Select this and a link to the agenda will appear here on the right-hand side, which allows you to open the agenda in PDF form and follow the discussion and the debate. Do I have any apologies for absence? No. Thank you. Just for the record, there's a couple of members are going to join us shortly. But thanks to everybody for turning up. At this point, I'd like to invite members to declare any interest. Members are asked to consider whether they have any disclosable pecuniary interests and/or any other on to public and member questions. I have had a public question. The public question is from Stephen Jones, and the questioner does not wish to attend the committee, but has asked me to read the question out on his behalf. So his question is, the Oval Sports Hall is still closed for COVID vaccinations. However, the hall frequently seems to be closed and not being used much for this purpose. Why is an important sports hall being kept mothballed when other local buildings could be used for vaccinating, such as Bebington Civic Centre, for example? Also, why was the expensive sports hall wooden floor not covered before thousands of members at the Oval for COVID-19 vaccinations was made early on in the pandemic between the Council and its healthcare partners as part of a joint agency response to the pandemic. This agreement is in place until March 2022, and the site will continue to support the operation during the uncertain winter period. The NHS are currently using 5 to 7 vaccination lanes, 2 to 3 days per week. As they enter the next phase of the booster programme in the coming 2 to 3 weeks, that will increase to 4 to 6 days per week. Bebington Civic Centre could not accommodate the 5 to 7 lanes required, and other activities are planned to take place at this site. The sports hall at the Oval is a sealed granwood floor. And we have Sally Shaw to present the report. Over to you, Sally. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This report sets out the background to the proposed destination marketing programme and requests members to accept the grant funding awarded by Liverpool City Region in order to deliver a number of tourism-related activities. The report sets out that in 2019, prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, the Liverpool City Region Visitor Economy Group developed a proposal for funding from for the combined authorities' single investment fund to promote tourism across is focused on plans for Liverpool, Sefton and Wirral, and will enable a range of activity to take place. This includes improvements to the city region's destination websites, and that includes the visitwirral.com website, and there will be an investment in operating systems to make them more effective and to create a better experience for users of the website. This is the first part of the project that will actually be actioned. In addition to the website, there will be a number of activities, such as there will be seasonal leisure, a chance to improve and to adopt a training programme for which a Liverpool City Region Welcome programme, so that it's really aimed at supporting frontline staff to welcome visitors to the area. So there are a number of other activities are set out in the report. In total, the project will last for 3 years, and Wirral has been awarded £350,000 from the city region in order to take it forward. The detail of the grant allocation is being finalised, and the funding agreement is going to follow in December. Following this activity related to the programme really needs to start Chris?
Thank you, Helen. Thanks, Councillor Cameron. Thank you very much for that, for the report as well. Sally, just a couple of things. Really. First of all, a comment. You know, it's welcome that the destination marketing strategy is now going into a very practical based phase, which we desperately need. I know when I became a councillor there didn't seem to feel to me that there was a really clear understanding of just how important the visitor economy is to the city region. And obviously we have taken severe steps back because of COVID, but great to see that this initiative is there to start to help with the recovery. I just had one quick question, and that was on point 3.9. The campaigns will be steered and underpinned by a Liverpool City Region visitor economy.
Just to thank everyone for the great progress that's been made here, and obviously we're all aware that in normal times the tourism is the greatest earner in the city region economy, and we need to be very much in position to take this on. And just welcome all the work that's been done by the staff. It's been fantastic, and not much more else to say, but just thank you very much indeed, and thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report, Sally. In 4.1, the funding there, I just want a bit more clarity about that, please. So we'd be getting 350,000 from Liverpool City region, and then we would contribute as a council £150,000.
I think it's also worth mentioning that, as you obviously only too well aware, that we made a large budget saving in terms of the culture and visitor economy team as part of the budget saving options. And this is really, I think at the time, it was recognised that having one of the ways of managing that budget saving was to be able to bring in external resources, and therefore to be able to really boost delivery, because as we said, it is a very key sector to the authority. So whilst it is additional funding, it is funding that will enable us to actually deliver against the support in this sector. And therefore, my understanding is that it is still earmarked because it is contained.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And again, to thank Sally for the written report and the verbal update tonight. My specific question, Chair, is on paragraph 3.2, where it says that the city region's visitor economy is normally worth £4.9 billion a year and supports 59,000 jobs. Is it possible to break that down into how much a year and how many jobs are affected specifically in Wirral? Are those figures available, please? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think that we can break those figures down, and I'm very happy to provide those to the committee, so I'll come back on that if that's okay.
Thank you. Yeah, it kind of ties in with what I was hoping to see. So time is of the essence with other more pressing issues, but if we have a summary of what the strategy document that's coming in November is in relation to the Experian mosaic, so that's already produced, isn't it? That's pretty much why you sign into that, and then just any of those KPIs that relate specifically to the Wirral, just picked out of the LCR documents. I think that would be really helpful, and obviously that can go to both committees then, because it will already be done. Thanks. Councillor Wood.
Just a point of clarification, please, as through the
all above the line spend? Do we have lots of assets that we can already utilise for the website, or will we be employing lots of creatives to create more? And particularly some of the most expensive, you know, aerial photography and things like that. It's the really expensive stuff. So I'm hoping this is mostly above the line to have the most impact. But if there's anything else, if you could give me an idea.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, that's certainly, we will be looking to, obviously, to make the as best use as we possibly can of existing resources that we have in place. In addition, the development of the website is because it's not just Wirral's. This is a city region approach to destination marketing, which I
That's great, thanks. Oh, no, I did have one other question, that is. We seem to have, in the past, done a fair amount of reciprocal work with Chester West and Cheshire, and I think at one point their websites were called Chester, Cheshire and Beyond, which I was delighted with. It now has a bit more of an emphasis around North East Wales, but obviously we're match funding this. Can we really look at the Wirral as a peninsula, not just as a borough, and how we can dovetail into the beautiful city of Chester, because I think it's got obviously a lot that is similar to the Wirral. In fact, we fill in a gap.
I think that will be aided by the fact that we are both members of the Mersey Alliance, and there's a fair amount of work going on at the moment through the Mersey Alliance. So I think we can utilise that body as well to make sure that we've got that connectivity. Great.
It's always good where there's already an existing channel. Thank you very much. I'm happy to read out the recommendations if everybody's finished the debate. So the recommendation is, number one, is to note the funding is subject to receiving and entering into a formal grant funding agreement which details the terms and conditions of the award, and to authorise the Director of and we have Jane Morgan to present the report, and Sally's going to stay in attendance, thank you, to deal with any questions as well. Over to you, Jane. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Chair. And thanks to members of the committee for the opportunity to present this report. The report provides an update on the development of a culture and heritage strategy for Birkenhead. This was commissioned in support of the Council's ambitious regeneration plans. And I would add that the strategy is identified as a key enabler in the 2040 framework document for Birkenhead. The strategy will also contribute to a number of objectives in the Wirral Plan 2021 to 26, and whilst the contents of the report has particular relevance for Birkenhead in respect of the Birkenhead 2040 framework, it also affects all wards in the borough, and I'll talk a little bit about how that is as I talk through the report. The aim of the strategy, as I've set out in 3.3, is fundamentally to harness the opportunities presented by the regeneration programme, to bring together our cultural partners and creative communities to ensure projects are co-designed and to maximise the limited resources available. Perhaps an example I'd give of that is we have developed a creative bulletin which has been in place for some time. We wouldn't restrict that to Birkenhead creatives. That would be something that would benefit all of the creatives across the borough in terms of funding opportunities, etc. So that's one example where the activity would be Wirral-wide in that sense. The draft strategy is presented as Appendix 1 to the report, and I would ask the committee to note that the long-term vision in the strategy is aligned to the Birkenhead 2040 framework. But we do have an initial delivery time frame of 5 years, 2021 to 2026, to align to the Wirral Plan and economic strategy, as well as provide a really targeted focus for work over the coming years. There are a number of overarching themes and priorities in the strategy, and these are summarised in Table 1 in the main body of the report. I won't talk through this in great detail, and I won't talk through Appendix 1 in great detail, but I did want to pull out a couple of examples to demonstrate the approach that's been taken to pulling this strategy together. And because there are limited resources, but also this is a strategy that can only be delivered in partnership, both with our cultural partners, our cultural organisations, also with our communities and our stakeholders, and there are many examples of those, from heritage stakeholders to other organisations who work through creative practice. So with the Chair's permission, I'll just pull out a couple of examples. The first theme is around Destination Birkenhead, and this is around the priority really in the theme that links most to the 2040 framework. The priority around developing a visitor destination offer would link, of course, to the report that Sally's just presented around destination marketing, so that's a key enabler for that priority. But we also have some key projects coming forward, Eureka Mersey opening next year, a number of the town deal projects which are creatively focused or culturally led, and we've recently had, for example, more funding from Levelling Up to focus on the Woodside area. So there is a number of very big infrastructure and other projects which this strategy will enhance through the work it will do with partners to maximise the opportunities. Another example I would pull out would be under strategy theme 2, which is creative people and cultural communities. This one is really certainly really important to me in terms of how we actually engage communities in those, both in the regeneration opportunities but also more widely in arts, culture and creativity. The priorities in here are about the council in its facilitating, in its enabling role, in its influencing role, seeking to work with partners such as Arts Council England and others to bring resources into the area, and we all already having lots of proactive conversations in that regard. It's also working with our education partners like ADJOURNMENT, our schools partners, to make sure that creative curriculum is at the heart of activity wherever possible. And getting communities on board through inclusive action and engagement is something that I think, building back after the pandemic, we know that arts culture can be massively impactful in terms of people's well-being. So we will work with partners like public health, and we already work on these issues to maximise opportunities for creativity as part of well-being programmes. So that's a sort of an example really of how we will work through this strategy to enable opportunities. A really important part of the stage with the draft strategy, but that evidence base is really important in informing the further work on the strategy. And probably one final point to make is that the report, the strategy references joint working across council directorates, and certainly from a regeneration perspective, we're working really closely with our colleagues in neighbourhoods to maximise the work that we're doing and to reflect the important assets like Birkenhead Park, which has its 175th anniversary next year, and we want to make that a really kind of special programme which tells the narrative of what's happening in the town, in the wider borough, as well as celebrating that important anniversary. I think, Chair, that's okay. I'll hand over to you to read the recommendations.
No, thank you, Jane, and thank you for the time you gave when we all had the workshop, and you took us through in detail. I think what I like about the deck that we have, where you brought everything to life, is we still have a summary table which is really nice, in columns for the first 5 years. That's ideal. So thanks for that, because sometimes being succinct is the hardest thing. And
I found it really very, very useful indeed, and very exciting. From my point of view, when I go back to when I first became a councillor in 2014, it feels like we've come such a long way in the fact that now we have a clear and linked up strategic approach to culture, and it's great that it's now sitting very nicely in partnership with regeneration. However, obviously, as you've said, culture does kind of, go across all sorts of other areas and themes in our society. And one thing I will say is that I think there are many councillors who aren't on this committee who would be very interested to be able to get access to the workshop, understand that this is a Birkenhead framework, but it's actually going to only work if the whole of the Wirral is involved, just as the whole of the Wirral was completely involved during Borough of Culture, and all of the constituencies had really big involvement in developing that year of culture. That's why it was successful. A couple of questions then. First of all, neighbourhoods is being mentioned as being going to be more involved in how you're going to deliver the strategy. I wondered if you could speak to that in a little bit more detail, as it wasn't really outlined in too much detail in the presentation either. Great to see such a clear, positive, dynamic emphasis as well. Again, very heartened to hear that Birkenhead Park is now being kind of brought into the conversation. We mustn't be missing that out, particularly, I mean, with it being such a cultural gem and such a cultural treasure for us here on the Wirral. I'd like to know a bit more detail about any plans for the 175th anniversary, as it's next year. So if we want to do something as spectacular as we did in Borough of Culture Year, obviously we need to know what's being brought forward. I also I'm very heartened to hear that the Creative Network Bulletin that I sort of asked officers to set up is continuing, because far from the myth that creatives are sort of dizzy and fuzzy and don't really know how to do business planning,
to appointment in development of the strategy. The Birkenhead 2040 framework, you'll be familiar with, has a specific boundary. Some of our cultural assets fall outside that boundary, so Birkenhead Park, Williamson, and you know, and there are many other heritage assets which don't necessarily sit within that formal boundary. When we started the consultation, it was obviously very clear. If we were talking to people about Birkenhead, culture and heritage in Birkenhead, they were going to talk about those assets, those jewels in our crown. So that became, you know, that became very much part of the conversation. I'm going to be working with Andy's team, the Williamson, to develop their museum service strategy, so that we make sure that anything that comes forward for the Williamson is really embracing the opportunities we've got with the wider regen programme, because there are some exciting new projects, there are some big infrastructure projects which will have a huge impact on how they want to work with us to deliver that from both from creatives and communities, and really get people enthused. So we'll be doing that between now and the new year, so that's something that will be ongoing. And in terms of the, if I pick up on the point about the 175th anniversary, really exciting, lovely to be working with colleagues at Birkenhead Park who've already developed a really exciting programme with community events, lots of things that were in the pipeline pre-COVID as well that they would now want to bring to the fore, and lots of things that actually we were tested in 2019, things like art in the park, where people come and do drawings of the park as a group. It's really, some really lovely wellbeing activities as well. But what we are doing is working collectively on an Arts Council bid for some, hopefully some significant funding, which will mean we can put on some more, some bigger activity, if you like, some installations.
Of the Arts Council, obviously so much work has gone on over the years to get Arts Council to come back to the Wirral and visit the Wirral and sort of re-energise that relationship. So it's key that they're on board, and I did hear you mention it, but it would be great if you can be bringing back to this committee how that's going, what that's going to consist of in terms of I know the invitation for them and heritage National Heritage Lottery is also, you know, something that's very important. And I think, you know, engaging with the Arts Council on the 175th anniversary is really key, and details of that being brought back to this committee will be really welcome.
Because, you know, neighbourhoods covers transport, parks. I know that the museums team were really involved early on with the counterculture discussions and fed quite extensively into that, and that work is ongoing. But think, you know, even the emerging projects such as the Green Corridor. We've had meetings this week with Regen colleagues around the connectivity of that to things like the Priory and the Transport Museum, etc. So that working relationship has really improved. Right across all of those services that sit within neighbourhoods there and beyond those that we kind of think of
Thomas Gradgrind, who's a utilitarian mill owner who is driven by the importance of facts and statistics and has no time for culture. But his son, who gets into trouble, is rescued, ironically, by the owner of Sleary's Circus, a man who Gradgrind has previously despised. And I can't help but feel, you know, we're in that situation ourselves. You know, where Wirral is facing hard times.
Sorry,
and we've got 21st...
Sorry, can I just interrupt, Councillor? So our agenda was cut short for tonight with 2 items because of PERDA, and they were pushed into December. I would really, I know you're making metaphorical statements, I'd really like us to keep quite tight to questions that Jane can answer around specifically what has been brought, because officers made a decision to
provider, and that is why it is encouraging to see all the links you're making out for finding funding and support from outside agents, because the artists, the creative people in Wirral will survive even without the council's support. They are innovative, they are they're resourceful. I was thinking just recently we had over 1,000 people going into the Williamson to look at the Oxton Art Fair. And it shows what a, you know, enthusiasm and passion there is for that cultural life within Wirral. And I just wonder, you know, how we're going to drive these things forward with such limited resources. And I know you can work miracles, but it's going to be very challenging, isn't it?
Thanks. Just to say, Jane, I know you're always happy to answer these questions questions, but this committee has recently been told in no uncertain terms how we have to concentrate on our budget. So don't
as part of applications to the likes of the Arts Council, sorry, I keep mentioning the Arts Council, or Heritage Lottery, where we can actually bring in some revenue to support what we would like to do around culture, creativity and communities. There is no guarantees around some of that, but I think we're in a really good place to lever in some of those resources. Sally might want to add to that. Chair, thank you.
Chair, if that's okay, just to add to that, that I think it's also the previous discussion around the close working with neighbourhoods. It also actually is not just the fact that regeneration is working with neighbourhoods, but actually regeneration is getting a much better understanding of working in terms of this space of culture and visitor economy as well. And I think a lot of the projects that we might have brought forward in the past as being just a pure, perhaps a physical regeneration project, we're now looking at it, all officers in the regeneration service, with a very different lens, and we're maximising the opportunities that we need to do in order to deliver this culture and heritage strategy by the mainstream work that we're doing as part of that regeneration programme. So just really wanted to make that point as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Williams.
Yeah, thanks, Jane, and thanks for the infectious enthusiasm, which really moves the world. Yeah, just a number of issues, really. I mean, again, you highlighted how important our voluntary group, voluntary and heritage groups are. A special thank you for all the work you've done to engage communities here across the Wirral and of course Birkenhead, and it's just been been a wonderful and excellent project that you've done with great results. I would also highlight that again, as you say, the importance of our heritage groups. We all know, first of all, conservation areas, Wirral and the Wirral History and Heritage Association, encapsulating 60 heritage groups, but there's another key one there we've not work that is going on to validate, and come up with a national battlefield site. Basically affects a large proportion of the Wirral. And in fact, the Vikings, who obviously were part of the battle, they would have had to, half of the Wirral in the 9th century was underwater. So they would have had to come into basically what was Wallasey Pool. That would have been there. So the fines that they are coming up with are just utterly amazing, involving coinage from across the world, and just really significant fines. So Wirral Archaeology, I'd just like to put down for special praise for the magnificent work that they are doing at this moment of time. It's been recognised by international institutions, and just the great work as ever of the avocational historical groups that are just mind-blowing, really. And as I said, if we ever see the film The Dig, that tells you how much avocational historians do to push forward major historical projects. So they're the lifeblood of those projects. And just in relation to Birkenhead Park, and we know obviously Birkenhead Park and its unique connections with Central Park in New York, but Francis Law Olmsted, the American landscape architect, who obviously Birkenhead Park was his role model for Central Park in New York, but it was a role model for parks right across America. There's a Birkenhead Park influence in parks across America. So one thing would very much like, and I know all the difficulties of funding, but to maintain the connections with Central Park in New York, because we've had some really good partnerships through the years. So I think that is a very important issue, and I think the heritage groups will step up to assist the council more, and which they are doing in the most magnificent way. I think Chris and I, and I'm sure everyone, the Clatterbridge councillors and everyone, really, as I say, the work that Wirral Archaeology are doing from a benefit to the Wirral, it's just seismic. It's utterly seismic.
Go on the website.
Yeah. And we were just knocked out, weren't we, with the fines, and it's just ongoing all the time. So just a special thank you for all the work that you've done, yourself, and I know how much work you've put into this, but to all the staff who've been quite magnificent in very difficult circumstances. And
I think that Jane had brought, but obviously they're all working very closely together. And yes, I think you've clearly stated lifelong learning. It's quite embedded in there. Councillor Cleary.
Sorry, thanks, Chair, and thank you, Jane. I'll echo the comments from others about your enthusiasm. It's very lovely to.
Sorry, could you just pop your microphone off?
Oh, sorry.
It's going to whistle back. Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, just to say, echoing the comments earlier about Jane's enthusiasm, I'm sure that's reflective of the people you work with as well. So I would just like to pass on my thanks to you for everything that you're doing. I do have a question around section 1.2 in the table. I was really pleased to see this in there about improving local connectivity, and as you call it, wayfinding and the visitor experience. And particularly in relation to Birkenhead, it's not always the easiest place to walk around. And it's really, really important that as part of regeneration we fundamentally change that and turn it into a place that is really pedestrian friendly. And my specific question really relates to you mentioned, again, really pleased to see the mention of the design guide in there, which is, as we know, emerging and is certainly from my point of view very, very exciting. I think the principles that underline the design guide, the concepts that are coming through, the 15-minute neighbourhoods, they are really, really exciting. They're exactly the way we need to go in terms of creating a people-friendly plan.
Work has been developed, and I haven't been involved in much detail of that. Keith Keeley's been leading on that, who I work with, but it has involved from the start those key parts of our organisation that it really does matter to start having that conversation at the earliest stage. So our highways colleagues, or our colleagues in neighbourhoods, to kind of get that understanding of what this would mean for design and the public realm. And I think that is really important and a really good piece of work in that sense. That it's been very involved from the start. For me particularly, and I'll probably answer specifically for me, and Sally might want to add anything around sort of the wider impacts, but certainly from a cultural perspective, public art and good public design can make people feel fantastic about their place, and that can be, it can be greening, it can be planting, it can be innovative schemes like that. But it can also be the way we design things more playfully, or others opportunities to engage in a really meaningful way with the public realm. So I'm really keen for that to come through. Because I think we've got a really exciting opportunity with the projects that we've got, and the public realm work that we've got to do something pretty transformational really around that, and
on a shelf. I think it's fundamental really to what we're doing, in the sense that we cannot possibly do the regeneration programme that we've got underway, but in a kind of a piecemeal way. I think the whole emphasis of the 2040 framework is that I suppose the different areas need to complement each other and join up in terms of that development. The opportunities for our communities to be part of that programme and part of that, and all influence and co-create a number of the work that we do is part of that. But fundamentally, it's about the ambition and the quality that we're going to bring forward in that regeneration programme. And that's really what the design guide with the public realm strategy is going to set out for us, so that we are having that level of quality that will raise our game in Birkenhead. And as culture, as a fundamental part of that we absolutely will be making sure that the principles, well, you'll be embedding them from the word go, but equally helping to create them through the context that you've set out around the work you're doing.
So am I right in assuming that we'll be getting another report either at the December or possibly the January meeting of this committee? Do we know yet when we're getting it? Thanks, Chair.
So for this committee, it isn't a key decision, but we were keen for officers to bring it to this committee as well, because it's a cross-cutting theme. But yes, the timelines tie in with the local plan as well, and everything that we have to do in the new year, and everything that we'll be looking at will also come into play in terms of our work programme. But I'd be really keen for something to come back if possible, but we'll have to look at the priorities on that. But your local plan dates, and in terms of your the fuller read.
Many of those are central government source funding, so they're to be welcome. The fact that central government is effectively funding a lot of the indicative funding for this, which is great. What about the private sector? Now, you do mention private sector investment. Are there any particular ways you think you're able to perhaps attract some private sector investment as well, please? That's my first question. The second one, which we've touched on just before, is the idea of wider Wirral. That the focus of this is Birkenhead, and effectively you've got a blueprint blueprint really for taking this forward elsewhere, and what your ideas are.
We will think about that in more detail. So effectively that is around hopefully sponsorship for some of the things that we'll do or some of the programmes that we'll bring forward. I mean, an ideal opportunity might be Birkenhead Park's 175th. You know, we can raise the profile of that if we can lever in additional funding to tell the story, as I say, of what's happening in Birkenhead and the wider borough. Completely agree around the wider Wirral point, and the plan for next year, alongside starting to deliver the specifics of this strategy, will be to start an engagement programme across Wirral, and the budget that we've got to take forward the strategy, we'd like to use some of that to have that dialogue with creative communities across Wirral, to start to think about
Birkenhead to me is we're talking about that engagement going across the whole of the borough, but it's that sense that Birkenhead belongs to this borough, so it's everybody connects in, so it's that connectivity and how to embrace that. So from, you know, for other parts of the borough, how do they connect in and how do they feed in their thoughts? And it, to me, it's, you know, Birkenhead is a place that belongs to all of Wirral, and I want to see that strengthened as well. So thank you very much for bringing this, and I look forward to seeing the report later on.
Thank you. And although there may be a few people that don't like looking at the facts and figures, you have an evidence base. That evidence base always to the evidence base. Thanks.
Oops. Yes. The evidence base is quite extensive, but we really wanted to take an opportunity to refresh it, given it was produced kind of earlier in the year, and some of the some things have moved on quite a lot in terms of the funding landscape, and also the organisations involved of moving on at pace. So that evidence base is really key for, as you say, for those funding conversations. It also contains really detailed asset mapping of things like our heritage assets. So again, that's really important for funding conversations, but also to feed into the wider regen programme. So I'm just reviewing that now to make sure it does actually capture what we need to take forward, and the delivery planning element. Yes, you're absolutely right about the 2019 evaluation of Borough of Culture was done undertaken through the City Region, and there was some funding assigned to that, and we were working with Liverpool John Moores. That's been in abeyance because of COVID, but is now coming to, so I'll be able to share that report with the committee in due course, and that will include
it's clearly that, you know, when people need support for no matter what sector they're in, they need that support, and we're funding that. So we really need to see that it's happening, not just assume that they're all perfectly capable of it all.
Chair, if I may answer that. I probably can't say very much at this point, because we are literally at the point where the contract for the business support services that we let has been out to tender, and that it's that contract that contains the element that you're referring to in terms of support for it contains requirement to support a number of our key growth sectors, the visitor economy being one of those. We have the data's closed, the evaluation has taken place, but we have yet to actually announce the award of that contract. So if you could
do more, that they understand the plight that Wirral's in, and these are exactly the people, and these are exactly the organisations who will come that extra mile to help, and I think you know that, Jane and Sally, that's already happening. I also want to just briefly echo everything that Jerry said about Wirral archaeology. We were there for a good 2.5 hours last Friday, and we could have been still there probably, but we had to leave. But they were absolutely inspirational. I went on the website afterwards. It wasn't just the finds, it was the people. They are experts, they are passionate, they are from Wirral, and they do this voluntarily. I think there's a real potential connection with Eureka. You know, some of the expertise, the passion that was there in that room, there would be a real opportunity, I think, just to you know, network those people. Additional comments, thanks, Chair.
Yes, thanks. And I'm sure we've all seen, certainly, regeneration across the decades. Shoreditch is the prime example, where it's the creatives first, and then everything else follows. So they are not following us, they're already ahead of the curve. And yes, we will. There's been a fair amount of attention to Brunanburgh. And I'll just repeat that, yes, we will try and bring it back. And as Jerry mentioned, the Conservative Council spent all day with them as well. I would like it to come back, but at this moment in time, you will understand that we've got to be very tight on our work programme. Is everybody happy that they've all spoken? Are we happy to move to the recommendations? So the regeneration piece, we understand currently where it's sitting, but no, thank you for all your time and the workshops as well. Thank you. That brings us on to agenda item number 8 even. Pages 49 to 146 in your pack is the Public Health Annual Report for 2020-21, and we have Julie Webster here to present that report.
Thank you, Councillor, and thank you for allowing me to attend this evening to present the 2021 Public Health Annual Report. Apologies to those of you who've heard it before, but I hope you think it's worth hearing more than once, or maybe even twice. So the Public Health Annual Report is the independent annual report of the Director of Public Health and is a statutory requirement. The 2020 as I say, that impact of COVID will have more impact on our local communities. Just a bit of a reference that the annual report is an important document to identify key issues, flag up problems, report progress and to inform local action. And it's really to make sure that we do have this focus that we can impact on the health of local people. Since the Council took back responsibility for public health in 2013, we've had 6 reports, and I was just reflecting to Jane that actually in 2019 we looked at the role of culture in health and wellbeing. That was the theme of the 2019 Public Health Annual Report, which probably didn't get the profile it would have done because then other things overtook us. So these reports have made a difference. It has led to action, and particularly want to just reference British residents repatriated from Wuhan, China. And since then, we've all worked together to keep Wirral well. And I would reflect that experience at Arrow Park in January, February 2020 has really led us to being able to develop a great partnership across partners that I think really stood us in good stead to then face the many challenges that came our way. But although COVID-19 has been the biggest health problem that we've had that's affected us for many generations, many of the enduring health problems we faced before the pandemic have worsened as a result. And my reflection would be experiencing health, economic and social inequalities. So within the report, and you've got a presentation within your pack, you'll see in there that there's a diagram that talks about the wider determinants of health, because being healthy is not just about the NHS services that we have. In fact, it's very much more than that. It's very much about where we live, the neighbourhoods we live in, our work, our community, our employment opportunities, many of the things that you've been talking about tonight. And actually, if we get those things right, we can help people to live longer, healthier lives. Because some of the major problems that we have within this borough are the differences that we see in life expectancy between the east and the west side of the borough. And it's not just that sort of absolute life expectancy. There's local people and the people who gave up smoking. Done some fabulous work about really reducing that level down. We also score very highly with regard to our air quality within this borough and to the green spaces that we've got. And I know that's something that everybody within this committee is very passionate about. But as I've mentioned, and as you will see, there's a snake diagram within the report that shows you where sometimes our indicators are better than England, sometimes they're at the average, or sometimes they're worse, and unfortunately we tend to have more that fall below the England average. And I would just pick up, and I've already mentioned life expectancy at birth, and another one I'd pick up would be around fuel poverty as well. So as I've mentioned, I believe we've got a real opportunity to reduce that gap between our communities and the rest of England. And I think we're looking at where we believe anything that might be a negative impact on health can either be mitigated or removed, ideally, but obviously that can't always happen, but definitely that we have mitigation in there. There's also a recommendation about safeguarding a healthy standard of living for all, and talk about the need to make sure that we've got an integrated information and advice offer, and that we build on the progress made during the pandemic to support people who are homeless. I'm just picking out a few recommendations in each of those, because there's quite a few recommendations. And the Health and Wellbeing Board will be overseeing this work, and we are developing a delivery plan to go alongside this to make sure that these recommendations are progressed. And then finally, and again, a big part of your conversation tonight, and a major part of our response to COVID is how we work with our residents and partners. The work of the humanitarian cell throughout COVID has been just amazing, and the way that our communities came together to really help and support each other. So we really want to build on that work and really make sure that, and you've mentioned so many groups tonight, really make sure that those groups are acknowledged, supported, enabled, and that they see that they've got a fundamental role to play in keeping this borough safe, well and happy. So they're the 5 recommendations. They are quite broad, but I do believe it gives us a framework under which the work of the council and partners can actually start to and then also across Cheshire and Merseyside. Part of that work will be about coming up with a set of indicators that we can then measure our direction of travel over time. That work will be linked with the Public Health Annual Report and be developed into a health and wellbeing strategy for the Health and Wellbeing Board to monitor as that board develops over time. Thank you for your time tonight. Hope you've enjoyed reading the report. And we just need to make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing the report. I know you have to bring it to lots of committees, but the report itself is really good to read, lots of infographics, and because you're dealing with quite complex data. Important indicator who will probably see this several times, as will Pat. So thanks for your patience going through it a couple of times, and thanks, Julie, to you and your team and everything over the last very busy 20 months. Do we have any questions? Councillor Kenny, Councillor Gilchrist.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Well, yeah, Julie, thanks very much for your report, and obviously you must have had a very challenging last 20 months at least, if not before that. So well done for all that you've done. My specific question, Chair, is when I first became a councillor, one of the things that struck me was the health inequalities, if you like, between people born and raised on the east side of the Wirral as opposed to the west side. And depending on who you ask, people say you're likely to live
sort of effort to make that happen. If we crack it, then we will be at the top of actually making a difference, because these are, as I said when I was outlining the report, the issues we've got here are historic, and they are very, unfortunately, entrenched within our infrastructure. So it does mean we've got to do things differently. I think we are starting to do that, but we've got to carry on doing it.
Thank you. Councillor Gilchrist.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not going to go over some of the things I've said at various other committees. So, different tax-free. And other similar establishments. And at that time we looked at St. Helens, which had a policy, and we said Wirral should have a similar policy. And I pay tribute to Maura McLaughlin, who particularly did work on this in the Rock Ferry area, but also looking at what schools and shops could do to promote healthy foods and healthy lifestyles. So in the reports, which I'm not going to quote from, but in the page 73 in big type or small type 19, and in the appendices, page 108 and 109, there's also the other side of the picture. First of all, I talked about families the green and blue infrastructure for Wirral that will be in the structure plan when we see it. I'll wear my other hat, which is interested in agriculture. The government are paying, will pay farmers to take land out of use in some respects and open it up to the community. So what I'm looking for is joined up thinking between helping people cope with diet, tackling certain unhealthy foods for sale in hot food takeaways and other premises, getting people to appreciate the virtues of exercise. That joined up circle, which also brings me back to exercise in
Thanks, Chair. Councillor Gilchrist. Yes, so with regard to the local plan, then we have undertaken a health impact assessment of the local plan to pick up those issues around the blue and green spaces, making sure that they're absolutely you know, those assets are being used and promoted locally, and we want to continue to do health impact. So health impact assessment is a tool that we use to, as I said before, look at where a policy is coming forward. We can make sure that it's having positive impacts on health, and if it's not, make some mitigating actions. So that's been taken forward with Keith Keeley, and we're definitely building that in. I want to build it into all the different elements that start to come as well. So we're definitely trying to see how we can ensure that leisure centres are very much part of that local infrastructure and encouraging people to be active as well. And just finally, sorry for me, yeah, another councillor reminded me that actually just before the pandemic we did some cross-party workshops around obesity that Councillor Clements led. And I can remember now sitting in the council chamber just before lockdown, I think, presenting that report back. It landed just at the wrong time, didn't it? So we need to go back and look at that and make sure that we're taking it forward, or if it's still fit for purpose. Thank you.
Why we, you know, when we do bring the new sport and physical activity strategy, which will come in the December committee, it will address how we try to tackle some of these barriers as well, and it's not just as simple as saying we have lots of leisure centres or parks and things come and exercise in them. There is a piece of work to do prior to that to get over these barriers that people face in actually getting to that point, I think, as well. So, you know, and as Julie alludes to, we are kind of working on that. These are very granular programmes. And Councillor Gilchrist, to pick up your point on this, they are taking place in our centres, but I think there's definitely scope to use more of our outdoor assets as well to do that more granular stuff. So, you know, buggy fit has really taken off, and that's one of our more recent programmes. Tai Chi on the beach in West Kirby, again, trying to get outside, because obviously one thing that the COVID's taught us is that, you know, people actually do enjoy doing things outside if the conditions are sort of right. You know, you've seen here the spinning bikes sometimes as you come in. That was another one we sort of
to COVID. I had come across a few cases of social isolation, which we were dealing with, and we were finding particularly sad, and we didn't even realise that there was such a problem. The report talks about there's been increased support from yourselves and partners. Have we got back to the level we were at just prior to COVID, or have we still got a long way to go? And is there something we can address on social isolation?
Thanks, Councillor. To see what are the interventions that we need to put in, and how have the cohorts changed with regard to what support they need. And I think this is my comment about we know this about COVID at the moment, and probably in 5 years' time we'll know that much about COVID, and I think this is something that's going to have to sort of emerge and evolve over time. But it's definitely something that's on our radar. Lots of the agencies actually continue to do stuff during lockdown, but it is about now actually encouraging people, some of our most vulnerable people, to come out of their homes and re-engage with some of the activity that they were doing before. And that's definitely the conversations we're having with those key partners that I've mentioned. Thanks.
Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. Geographical stance to this. And again, I keep saying this a number of times, we do need a whole Wirral approach to everything that we do. I think we need to be very careful not to just automatically separate the Wirral into two, because as you can see there, those level of deprivation indices tremendously not geographically aimed at west and east automatically. So there's a big difference there, so I'd ask you to consider that as well, please. Thank you.
absolutely take, yes, and absolutely take your point there, Councillor Johnson, and
which seems to be so entrenched, which haven't really significantly shifted for generations. It's really worrying and really challenging, it's a wake-up call to us all, isn't it? You know, why should people living in one part of the borough live 10 years longer than their fellow citizens on the other side? It is just scandalous. And the trouble is, of course, these issues are just so deep rooted, and we are chipping away at the edge of it, but it's going to be a massive challenge to really turn that inequality around. But I admire the work you are doing and the passion you've got to bring about that improvement, because it's probably one of the most important things facing us as a council. But looking at one map in particular, is map 12. Who are struggling to actually have that face-to-face meeting with their doctor. They're being fobbed off with phone consultations, or having to go through e-consult and working their way through a sort of complex series of questions before they can get to see their doctor. And I suppose it's probably rather outside the remit of this committee, but I do feel there's a real issue here. Clearly, that triage through computer systems is helpful in some cases. It does for some people. That is all they will need, but I'm sure there are many people who are not getting to see their doctors, not getting the diagnosis they want, and there's maybe more serious illnesses are going undetected because things are being conducted remotely. And I'm sure there are many factors here, and it varies, I'm sure, from GP practice to GP practice, but it is something that worries
and that they are working really hard at the moment to make sure people are getting the access that they require. Thank you.
No, thanks for your view. Obviously, we do try and stick to the report that you've brought, but it's a theme at the moment, and I do, represent a ward where there's lots of elderly people, and it does feel like it's difficult. But we've had an awful lot of change, and we're just trying to come through the other side of it. Councillor Wood.
Thank you for the report, Julie, and bring it to the committee. You talk about fuel poverty and thinking about, as we go forward, as we go into this winter with energy companies, energy providers actually disappearing. Residents here and across the country, obviously, being then put onto higher tariffs. It's just how much scoping out is there going to in terms of online gambling and different types of gambling habits, and how that is impacting on the community, because it sucks money out of our communities. It does massive amounts of harm. So I just don't know whether there's any analysis in terms of online gambling. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. We've received something called the Household Support Grant, which Mark Camborne and his team are managing. So this is where we can support people who are facing food and fuel poverty issues over the winter months. So, and that's built on the work of the humanitarian cell did during the past 20 months. So we'll obviously use that then to help us shape what the future.
No, thank you for that. And yeah, I was aware of that funding opportunity in order to support residents who are actually going to be facing fuel and food poverty. My concerns is that we're going to have impacts on different people than those that fell before that baseline. How do we capture that, and what is the cut-off in order for applying for any of those funds? Because so many more people are going to be hit than previously have been hit. It's not a demographic in a certain part of the borough. So many people are going to be hit by aspects of fuel poverty.
I think it would be best for me to ask Mark to make sure that there's a briefing out to all councillors so that you've got the criteria.
Now, but I was just curious if they married up, because 2011 and 2019 is quite a big gap. Just curious, that was all.
I'm sorry, I don't know. I'd have to take that away and come back to you.
Always good to come up with a question that nobody can answer, Max. There is an extensive work by the Liverpool City region on air quality, and so we might be able to get some further detail. But yes, if we're waiting for census data from the 2021, and yeah, it's a big gap. Thank you. Are we all? Councillor Cleary.
Thank you, Chair. And thanks, Julie, for another enthusiastically delivered report. Not quite as positive development, just flies in the face of so many things that are in your report, you know, and we should have the weaponry to refuse those kind of applications. So I'd really encourage you to look at the new local plan from the point of view of a councillor on the planning committee who might face a similar application in the future, and will they have the grounds for refusal, which they should have, and we don't have at the moment. I just had a few comments on the recommendations, the specific recommendations, which I've read through and considered quite carefully. I was a bit surprised that the first recommendation was to prioritise economic regeneration and a strong whatever years of economic growth, and we're still left with all the things that Councillor Braham was pointing to, you know, the inequalities, and of course all the environmental crises that we face as well. So all that economic growth hasn't delivered a narrowing of the gap in inequalities. It's got worse, you could argue. And our environment in many respects is much worse than it was. So I think it just reflects a kind of thinking that if we get the economy right, most other things will fall into place. And I think that's manifestly not the case. So in broad that the Marmot community programme that we've spoken about and is coming forward through the Health and Wellbeing Board, etc., is really encouraging. I think the priorities that they list, I think, are a bit tighter than our own recommendations. And I just wonder if our report, because it refers to a historical period, is slightly out of date, given what's coming forward in terms of the Marmot community programme. And I just wonder, I suppose the question debate. So the other thing I wanted to mention was, I was a little bit concerned, to be honest, when you said we score well on air quality, and we score well relative to other places, but there's a couple of factors we need to consider there. I think we have some geographical advantages in terms of air quality. And also, we're not, I mean, the chair referred to the city region doing more work to measure air quality. I think at the moment we've got the station in Victoria Park in Tranmere that measures PM 2.0, which is right beside Borough Road, you know, a constant stream of traffic right beside the playground. And are we actually really doing enough to bear down on air quality? And are we thinking hard enough about it? And you know, when I listen to, oh, we're scoring quite well on air quality, I don't think we are. We might be relative to Greater Manchester or Blackburn or someplace, which is harder for them. They're landlocked. You know, we have a prevailing westerly wind that's blowing a lot of the pollution towards other people. So I think we need to think a bit harder about that, to be honest. So just to go back to my question, really.
Because we need those healthy and sustainable communities, because actually poverty is the major driver of health of inequality. So therefore we need regeneration to be able to support local people to have the employment opportunities that they need, to be able to make those choices and have the aspiration and opportunities that many of us have had. So I'm not changing the recommendation, because this is my report. I do stand by them. They will be used to, alongside the Marmot work, to then develop and to produce the local health and wellbeing strategy, as I've already mentioned. I do believe that these are what we need within this borough. Maybe some of the language is... I've used different language. We are better, and it's not always doom and gloom. But I do take your point that we have a different set of circumstances here, and a new air quality report is being worked on at the moment and will be coming forward. So you'll be able to address those questions to the officers that can give you the answers that or can address your questions that you've raised tonight. Thanks.
Thank you for giving a succinct but comprehensive answer to all of those key things, and also thank you for the phrasing of the report.
50,000 miles later, and that's where I am here now. Still just about surviving. Well, yeah, still surviving. A few injuries, but no. I mean, what I've noticed though, I mean, the park runs are a wonderful, wonderful thing, and they have really engaged people. I mean, I must admit, running around parks isn't always my... I'm a bit like the song in Blair in Park Life, and the joggers go round and around. I like to go on the public footpaths. But, you know, what an irony. I mean, I lived by Tranmere Rovers, you know, in Prenton. And I can literally, you know, 5 minutes run from my house, and I'm in the Greenbelt. And, you know, we're just so lucky to have, you know, this Greenbelt near to us. And I, you know, spend my life on the public footpaths. But what I have noticed is just the sheer number of people who are running now, you know, and it's just wonderful to see. And okay, I mean, there's all the other sporting, and you know, you don't. I mean, although I appreciate
Thank you. Ending on a positive and endorsing our green space. Have you already spoken to this? Okay, Councillor Spriggs.
I haven't, Chair. Thank you very much for your indulgence. I just wanted to quickly say thank you very much for the report, and I think it's a report that needs to be constantly coming back to and looking at. It's very rich. I just wanted to make a couple of quick comments. It's obvious that we understand on the Wirral that there are pockets of poverty across the whole of the Wirral. Of course there are. There's the Woodchurch Estate, there's the Overchurch Estate, there's the Beechwood Estate, there's the Noctorum, all in the west of the borough. But the facts remain, and perhaps the uncomfortable truth, is that, you know, as your report, which is evidence-based, says, feel very strong that we have to do much more, and we really appreciate everything that you've been doing on those issues, especially during the pandemic and watching what's happened even before the pandemic, as you quite rightly raised, Julie. So I just wanted to make that point. And sorry, I also wanted to just raise very quickly the deep concern and worry we have over young people's mental health and the, you know, the emergency that is coming. We know is coming. You know, we absolutely know from those who are working with young people with mental health issues that there is an absolute avalanche of problems coming, building on what was already there and what was already tough. So I just wanted to raise those issues. I don't know whether you wanted to quickly speak to those.
Yes, it's not an uncomfortable truth. We're all aware of it. We really all want to address this. We're all excited about the amount of funding now coming into regeneration, and we all have residents in our ward who weren't born there. They are living there in their 80s, but they may have been born in different circumstances, which is the proof of the interventions and the alterations and how we can help makes a difference, because some of the Marmot data never looked to try to estimate social mobility. It only ever looked to say where we need to concentrate our efforts, and those inequalities we've all seen, and now the inequity is what we're going to challenge. The inequity to give equity to people, to make sure that they are able to live much more fulfilling, healthier lives. But make no doubt, we are all just take a short comfort break. because it's now just coming up to 2 hours. I know a few people have popped out, but I haven't. So can we just adjourn slightly? Can we say come back in 5 minutes? Thanks. Thank you, everyone. We're on to agenda item number 8. No, we're not. We're on to agenda item number 9. We're making more progress than I thought. The budget monitoring quarter 2 in your packets, pages 147 to 162, and we have Sarah Cox here to present her report.
This report represents quarter 2 for the Tourism, Communities, Culture and Leisure Committee, and shows financial monitoring information up to the end of September 21-22. There's several recommendations in this report to note the year-end forecast revenue position of 158,000 adverse variance, and note that the report recommendation the revenue monitoring. The revenue forecast position is projected to be 158,000 adverse variance. This consists mainly of community safety, which is 190,000 adverse, which is due to income shortfalls, and there's work being done for quarter 3 to look to mitigate that. So when we come to do the quarter 3 report, it's there may be the case of that adverse variance will become a balanced position, and also within the area there's a 34,000 small favourable variance within culture and visitor economy. This is due to current non-staffing expenditure to 1. Savings progress is the next section. Most of the savings to this committee are on track to be fully achieved. The only saving relating to tourism visitor economy is reporting a 40,000 shortfall, which was due to employee notice periods within that saving. The full year effect of the saving will not be seen until 22-23. So moving on to reserves, £50,000 of reserves are projected to be used this financial year as at quarter 2, but this will be reviewed throughout the year. And within capital, table 5 shows a summarised version of the capital schemes, and with more details of each scheme provided in Appendix A. A favourable variance of quarter 3. So that concludes the finance monitoring report for quarter 2. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Do I have any questions? Councillor Brain?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Sarah, for your report. I'd just like a question about paragraph 310, sports and recreation, and the point about the freezing of the Invigorate memberships. Now it says they were going to be unfrozen in quarter 3, which is where we are now. So have they actually been
have to hand the actual number of people because, as I say, it's split across the two at this point, who have continued their membership. I am expecting there will be a drop-off because there are still a couple of sites that aren't fully operational. So we talked earlier about the Oval and the likes of Woodchurch, but I'm happy to get those figures and to circulate them to committee members outside of this meeting.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Using COVID funding to cover a shortfall in revenue, and I was consulting my colleague Councillor Jason Walsh, who represents Bevington. And he's particularly concerned about the Oval and the lack of availability of services there. So my question, I'll just detail some of his concerns that are specific to the Oval, but my question is really, or my concern really, is are we falling into the trap of using emergency COVID funding to cover shortfall quite limited, and I think they compare quite unfavourably to places like West Kirby. So, for example, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, there's no swimming after 2:45. Tuesday and Thursday mornings, there's no public swimming. There's no swimming at all any day before 9 a.m. The gym at the Oval is completely closed at the weekend.
Councillor Cleary.
Yeah, I'm
sorry, it does sound like a lot of casework coming to the committee on a section about the budget.
No, it's not casework. It's
So
really highlighting a concern with regard to the leisure centre, which
anything that Sarah Cox can help with, or Andy.
Well, I suppose it's really more for Andy, really, just to address the point, you know.
So that's how it's looking balanced, and we know there are more problems, and that's why the sports and physical activity strategy will be coming to the December committee if we can all make it. The decision was taken to have that broader discussion about, are we hiding the real problem with this temporary removing 4 million from the income targets, and it was considered during PERDA that we should have to delay that to the December committee. So I'm happy for Andy to cover off a few of the bits, but we don't want to go into what we know is going to be a fundamental problem for this committee going forwards.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah. In terms of the COVID funding, and Sarah will correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of that relates to the income loss compensation scheme, for which the criteria is very specific. So we're not by any means propping up, keeping facilities at the Oval closed and using COVID funding to do so. I can assure you of that.
Did you want to come back, Councillor Cleary?
Only to say that, I mean, I'm using that as an example to reflect a broader concern around the leisure offer. And, you know, I think obviously we're going to look at this in more detail, which is really, really important. That's the key thing. And I think it's perfectly okay to highlight this at the public committee, because it is a, you know, it will
we've had about all the various sporting activities taking place at the Oval, and of course the contribute again coming back with Wirral Athletic Club. I must admit you've done some really good work, particularly with the nets there for the pitch, you know, for the hammer nets. Yeah, of course. Do my apologies, but yeah, obviously the funding situations are always an acute issue, but as you say, access, and I know it's the vandalism as significantly not contributed to a number of the problems there in the access issues. But yes, as ever, I'll continue our conversations over the numerous matters that are going on there.
For future one-off commitments, and note the projected year-end capital forecast position of 3.161 favourable at Q2. Thank you, Sarah, for your report. I'm happy to propose that we agree all 4 recommendations in one fell swoop. Is that okay? Do I have a seconder? Councillor Wood? We agree by assent? Agreed. Thank you. Thanks very much, Sarah. This brings us on to item number 10. The Tourism Committee Budget Paper, pages 1
as an initial step in this process. The budget workshops were convened to enable officer and member liaison on proposed budget options in order to facilitate discussion and allow direction to be obtained on further analysis required. The budget workshops also provided an opportunity for alternative proposals to be considered. Workshops relating to this committee were held on 24th of July and 14th of September to discuss savings proposals. As outlined in the report, savings were discussed relating to an existing amount of £665,000, which was included in the medium-term financial plan. No new savings were put forward in addition to the 665k, although some of the items were replaced with others. None of these proposals were rejected at the workshop and could potentially be considered further. The figure
I think it'd be really helpful to separate those two out, because we've been advised, as we know, to now look at efficiencies and not necessarily income that we might not be able to bring in. So I think it's really important that we really focus in on savings now. We focus in on that. We've been asked to do that. So something like, for instance, leisure vehicle income is a hope and an aspiration as opposed to a definitive saving. So I think we need to be cautious about that. But in relation to sale loft income, I think we can go, you know, really congratulate Andy and his team for the work they've done on that. It's an amazing venue, and I think there's a lot that can be done with events and raising income through perhaps an extension of the offerings within the sale loft itself.
Needed in terms of P&R. So we will cover off these in greater depth. But Councillor, would you have a question?
Yeah, sorry about that. It's just on 3.7. I mean, it's got the expected dates, or the expected timeline for the comprehensive spending review, end of 2021. I didn't know whether, it's true to you, Chair, didn't know whether that would be available for the next committee, that we actually have some sort of definitive on what's outlined in 3.7. So it's to either, sorry.
So the actual approach to it is slightly changing. The key dates we have to bear in mind are P&R dates. We want to really look at our next committee meeting, which was really the item agenda. In the light of what we now know from the report back and the assurance review. So we can circulate some of those timelines, I think, might help when P&R are going to meet. Key dates in January, key dates that are on here, and any that are going to substantially change. But the ultimate decision maker, unfortunately, is P&R. Anybody want to add to that? Is that understanding correct, Mr. Gilchrist?
I have to say, thank you, Chair, that there are meetings of leaders taking place all the time to look at the timescales involved, and unfortunately the process will be quick in order to provide the assurance to the
to that point. Everybody happy to agree? I'm happy to propose. Anybody happy to second? Councillor Cleary, thank you for the second. Which brings us, sorry, we agree by assent, do we? We all agree by assent. So that brings us on to item 11, the work programme update. Our work programme wasn't particularly busy. We had asked for some things to come back. This work programme really now going forward needs to incorporate only those items which have a significant impact on this council's finances and this council's request for a capital directive. So I certainly don't want
hopefully Andy might have the answers. That the library strategy, which I take it will probably still go ahead, will that include one-stop shops?
can I just bring Sally in? So in terms of the facilities master plan, that's slightly different from the sports and physical activities strategy and the library strategy. So there's a facilities master plan, and that won't be coming to committee in December for the sports and physical activity strategy.
It's possible, but I would probably want to check further with those colleagues, and perhaps leave that to Andy to respond now.
Yeah, thanks, Andy.
Thank you, Chair. To answer Councillor Williams' question in a kind of roundabout way, there obviously are a number of libraries where they are co-located with one-stop shops. So, yes, the library strategy and new model will give consideration to one-stop shops and the future of one-stop shops, but also, you know, I think we've said early on when we've brought draft reports to this committee around libraries that we are still working towards a community hub model that will incorporate probably
agreed. Thank you, everybody. That brings us